You'll know when you have a wild woman. She'll practice her craft without boundaries. She is truly autonomous. Her loyalty is only to the family she serves. She will not allow herself to be held back by a system she didn't create.
This podcast is for the birth keepers who want to grow and change, who are open to learning through self-reflection and supportive community. We are creating a space to explore without judgment. We are remembering we were born wild. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Wild podcast. I'm your host, Sophia, and today I have with me Dr. Joel. Will you just start off by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure. I am an integrative pediatrician. I am working currently in Los Angeles. I did all the regular medical training, went to great programs, trained at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, but I got a little bit frustrated with the regular system. And so I started learning about integrative medicine and natural medicine. And in my practice, I tried to combine the best of both worlds and have been doing that for over a decade now. But also over the last few years, I've tried to get more involved in social media and getting information out there and advocacy. That's been a lot of fun and just getting involved with that and writing some books. And I just wrote a book on vaccines, which has been always crazy to do, but so far so good.
This is our first episode on vaccines because it's hard to find anyone who wants to talk about it.
and I never talked about it. I never did. Obviously in the office I did, but it was the thing that I was getting asked about most. I had jotted things down for a while, but never really decided to do it until more recently with getting frustrated with everything and just getting so many questions from parents. I decided that I really wanted to put a book together that was balanced and discussed kind of both perspectives and really went through the pros and the cons and the concerns that parents have along with the research that we know.
Okay, I have 18 million questions that we have to fit in our hour. The first thing I want to ask you is how did you end up here, like where you are, being a pediatrician and talking about this? Like what in your life led you to this moment?
To being a pediatrician, I mean, I always loved working with kids. When I was growing up, I used to coach my brother in hockey and baseball and loved doing that, and then was working in summer camps for a while. And then I was just loved working with kids. So I think when I went to med school, it was always to become a pediatrician. I found that, kids listen and they can actually get better. I had more fun doing that than working with adults. And I love getting ahead of problems and preventing things, but just seemed the more that I went through actual training and the more in my career was really just treating things and not getting to the root cause of almost anything and just putting a Band-Aid. And just watching the chronic disease epidemic and increase in disease in our kids. And I just got really frustrated. And so again, that's what really kind of pushed me in that direction. But I think what really opened up my eyes to the whole natural medicine world was my now wife. I mean, she's very holistic minded. I met her during residency, and that really opened up my eyes to a different perspective. And I think being someone who's more open-minded, I saw people going outside of the system and getting better. And I was like, well, what is that? Like, why is a kid getting a diagnosis and they're on medications and they go to some, woo-woo naturopathic whatever and they get better? Like, what is that? And then, you start to learn that it's not so woo-woo after you start to learn a little bit about it. So that's how I got into medicine. The actual vaccine conversation, I mean, I was always having it in my office. It's the reason that people came most frequently. People are so frustrated they can't even have conversations with their doctors. They feel censored or silenced. And I felt, very censored and silenced in terms of anything with vaccines to the point where I wasn't really comfortable talking about it. But COVID really opened things up. I think a lot of people had a wake-up call during COVID. We saw a lot that didn't make a lot of sense and I think pushed a lot of people over the edge to the point where they are willing to talk about it now. And also with Secretary Kennedy being in office, I think it's really opened up the conversation around vaccines a lot in the last few months. And we're just really at a different place where we're not seeing the censorship anymore and people are much more interested to discuss things, whether they agree with him or not, that's up to them, but they certainly are more open to discussing vaccines as a topic.
Yeah, so we're a small midwifery practice, and so we talk about vaccines. Well, mainly the idea is that we were like, when we end care, what is your plan? Are you going to go to a pediatrician? Are you going to go to a naturopath? Are you not going to see anyone? What is the plan? And when they're like, I'm not sure what the plan is, we're like, well, what's your vaccine plan? Especially in California, determines like who will even accept you, because there are some practices where you can't even do delayed in the practice. You have to be doing everything on schedule or they won't see you. So how does that work in your practice? Like, because we don't have, very many medical exemptions anymore. What is the truth around medical exemptions? The rumor I heard is you have to have like an anaphylaxis reaction to that vaccine, and then you're only exempt from that vaccine. No sibling, can like follow suit with that. If their like sibling has a reaction, it has to be them. Families are like scared. It's like feels like this damned if you do, damned if you don't. Well, what if I don't do it and my kid gets something that could have been prevented? Or what if I bring them in, this healthy kid, and then they have a reaction, but I want to send them to school? And
so I think that like the first big question, kind of my perspective on things. To me, I am the same way in the book as I am in the office, as I am when I talk about things online. I don't feel like people should be forced to do anything. And I feel like we should be given information and we should be able to make the decisions that we feel like are best for our family. That's the way most things in medicine are. That's the way that most things are in life. But for whatever reason with vaccines, it seems like there's been this greater and greater push to force people or to really push people to do it, as opposed to make a recommendation based on whatever evidence that you have and then let people make a decision that feels right for them. It's not the way it has been moving with vaccines. I have patients in my office that do all the vaccines. I have patients that go on a slow schedule. I have some that don't do it. Again, I don't force people to do anything. We just have conversations and people do whatever they feel like is best for them. And that's the way that I approach things in the book. Again, I'm not trying to push people to do anything or not do anything. The point of the book is to have discussion and debate, to inform of what's out there, to show both sides. I don't think there are really any books out there right now that really do dive into both sides and kind of the pros and the cons. It's usually pretty one-sided with most of the books, and they have an agenda either to get you to vaccinate or to not get you to vaccinate. And I don't think that's very helpful to the majority of people that are in the middle on information and want to see something from Paul Offit or some of the CDC people right beside something that Secretary Kennedy says, or Neil Miller or other people, and kind of compare and contrast that information. But that's the way that I generally present things, and that's the way that I feel about vaccines. Now, with exemptions are dependent on which state you are or where you're located in the world. Every country, every state has different rules. Usually they're broken down by 3 categories. So you have personal belief, religious exemptions, and medical exemptions. Almost everywhere in the whole world, basically everywhere, has a medical exemption. So basically a medical exemption meaning you have some sort of medical condition that precludes you from getting a vaccine. And we can come back to medical exemptions in a minute, but that's kind of the general definition. For a religious belief, for some religion, somebody might have a personal belief that vaccines go against their religion, so they can get a religious exemption based on that. And then personal belief, just basically you don't want to do it, you don't believe in it, so therefore you write up a form saying you don't want to do it. Every state's different. Some places have the personal belief in religious, other places don't. Somewhere like California is quite strict. They have very, very, very strict rules in terms of the medical exemptions, and it has to follow the very strict criteria from the CDC, which are very minimal. So it is very hard to get an exemption in a place like California, because what you said is correct, that you really have to have a very serious documented reaction from a vaccine, which is extremely rare. Even if you have a reaction, a lot of times it's not recorded as a vaccine reaction, and family history, siblings doesn't usually factor in that much to a decision in California, just because it goes through public health and they don't, in general, it's just not seen as a vaccine reaction. So therefore it's not counted. So it is really, really tough in a place like California to get a medical exemption.
Yeah. Do you get in trouble as a pediatrician for writing too many? Are there rules around that?
You can. So it's not so much about too many per se as it is about writing exemptions that are not seen as following standard of care. In California, the rules are extremely strict in terms of if you write 5 exemptions, they're going to get looked at no matter what, but any exemption can get looked at and can get revoked if it doesn't meet their standards. So you submit it to public health, they'll look it through, and they'll accept it or decline it. But if they are declining them, if they're feeling like you're writing exemptions that don't meet standard of care, then they can come after you for your medical license or whatever, which has happened before.
So why do you think that in terms of vaccines, that it's feeling more and more forced? Like, why vaccines?
I believe that there has become more and more pushback, and there's been more and more concern around vaccines. And so the medical establishment feels like it's losing its grip on it, or it feels like the best way to move forward is to make things more mandatory. And that it works, right? It does work. You can look at the numbers, and places where there are strict requirements, more people do it. So I think it's just more about getting people to do it than figuring out what's right for each person individual level. The medical establishment in general feels that vaccines are the best thing ever, and they do a lot of good, and they rarely ever cause harm. And so that's their general belief. And so they'll do anything possible to get more people to get vaccines, which, is positives and negatives. It depends on the way that you feel about vaccines, I guess.
And like besides your book, obviously, how do parents decipher between the truth? There's like so much conflicting information out there about vaccines and the safety of them and risks and autism and just like autoimmune disease, anything like that. How do people find like trusted sources?
I mean, it's very hard, right? I think it depends what you want to trust as a source. So conventionally, medicine will say, well, you can go to the trusted sources, being the big organization. You can go to the CDC website, you can go to the American Academy of Pediatrics. And obviously, well, not obviously, but I would just say, I think it's very arrogant for me to say like, oh, I know better than the CDC. I know better than the American Academy. I don't think that way. I just think there's a lot of information, and we've been told and taught a lot of stuff, and people kind of parrot that and continue saying it forever. And no one really looks into the information themselves. And I think that we're in a different place now where information is available widely. You can look into things. People are questioning things more. And so I think, at least as of right now, it's hard to know exactly what to trust, but the best way to go about it is to read multiple different sources, read things with different viewpoints, try to synthesize them, create a viewpoint, and then hopefully you have a trusted resource, a doctor that you can talk to, or someone you can talk to that can answer your questions on some of these things. But a lot of the unfortunate part, and this is true of like a lot of the questions that parents have, there just aren't answers. We just don't have the research to give you a good answer for a lot of this stuff, which is unfortunate, because for the last 10, 20 years, a lot of the medical establishment will just say things are settled. We know there's no reason to get more research. Why would you even bring that up? You're crazy. You're an anti-vaxxer. And so we just don't have the answers to a lot of important questions that we really need, because we've never done the best kinds of research that we would need to be able to answer those questions. So we have some research, some data, some information, but a lot of it is contradictory. And you can see information on both sides, and you can shape the narrative how you like, which is not helpful to the parent who's not sure what to do.
Yeah. Well, for people not in LA who can't like sit with you and consult with you, how do you advise parents break down like what their plan is if they're gonna vaccinate on schedule, delay, decline, like how to individualize it? Like what questions should they be asking themselves to decipher what they should move forward with and when?
I think the first thing, and I mean, really the only recommendation technically, right, is the CDC schedule. That's what's been studied. That's what's been recommended. The first thing to decide is if you want to do that, right? If you want to do what's generally recommended and considered the best by medicine, then you can just do the CDC schedule, learn about it, and see if you're comfortable with it. And if that's what you want to do, then it's easy. If you want to do anything else, then that's when it becomes more difficult, because it then moves more to personal choice, and you have to start making decisions for what you feel like is best for your kid, but it's not necessarily evidence-based, because nothing's really been studied to say, well, this schedule is better than another schedule. So you have to start having discussions around your comfort level, like how many vaccines are you comfortable doing on any day? Are you comfortable doing any vaccines? How often do you want to come in? Which vaccines do you want to do versus not? So you have to start your research and learn, okay, what's recommended by the CDC or whichever public health body you're in? And then how many of those do I want to do, and when? And people in my office, they'll often make those decisions by weighing and looking at the actual diseases that the vaccines are preventing it, and saying, okay, well, what's actually around? What could kill my kid? What's more likely for them to get? What's less likely? What they're probably not going to get? So what can I push back? What am I more nervous about? That's usually how they do it. But everybody decides on those things differently. And some people say, well, okay, I just want to do one vaccine at a time. Other people say, well, I don't feel comfortable doing anything until my kid's 3. And that's not based on anything specific. It's based on their comfort level. It's not based on evidence, because it's never been studied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are there like detox protocols? Like, do you ever recommend preparing a child for a vaccine or doing something after that you feel can make a difference for them? Because that's the thing I really want studied, is like when kids do react, how could we find out that that's going to be the kid that's going to react versus just like,
right, that's just a brilliant question with no great answer. I mean, I talk about this in the book too. It's like, that is the kind of questions we should be asking. We have great scientific resources and technology now. We could be looking into these things. And you want to get more people to vaccinate medicine, like figure out who are the kids that are going to have a reaction, why they have a reaction, how do we minimize those reactions? That's going to give parents more confidence to do it. No one's ever done that kind of research before, and it's crazy. Like, we have to look into the genetics. Are there markers? Are there things that we can pinpoint this, is okay, this kid's at higher risk of getting a reaction to these vaccines or any vaccines. Like, that would be useful to know. Can we give kids any sort of supplements or support that would improve their detoxification, help their immune system in any way? It's never been studied. When I talk to parents, I'm like, okay, let's just use common sense for now. And logically speaking, okay, how do you support your natural detoxification system? So how do we get things out? We poop, we pee, and we sweat, right? So for kids, you want to make sure they're getting sunlight, so you're getting your vitamin D. You want to make sure they're moving, especially if they're older, so they're sweating. You want to make sure we're going to the bathroom. Make sure we're drinking a lot and not dehydrated around when you're getting vaccines. Drink a little extra. Maybe you can make sure they're going to the bathroom, so lots of fiber. You can do some magnesium. You want to support the immune system. Well, what generally supports the immune system? Like vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D, like these kind of things. They're very unlikely to cause any harm. They may help, they may not. But to me, it says, common sense to me says they're not going to harm. So they might help a little bit. So if people want to do it, then why not? But they haven't been studied to say like, oh, you take vitamin C, you lower your risk of having a reaction. But we should study those things.
Yeah. Or like if they are pairing up vaccines, are you more likely to have a reaction when there's more than one given at a time, or is that not a factor?
There's very little research on that. So it's not studied in that way for safety in general of multiple vaccines in general. They're just assumed to be safe and any kind of mix and match that you want to do. So they're just really, again, it's not a lot of research saying, well, if you just do one vaccine versus three, then that's going to decrease your risk of X, Y, or Z. We don't have a lot of that. And we certainly don't have almost any long-term research on vaccines, which is really tough. So we do have some basic stuff on short-term, like fevers and pain and those kind of things, but that's not generally what parents are worried about. They're more worried about like the risk of autoimmune conditions, the risk of asthma, the risk of ADHD, the risk of autism. That's what parents are more worried about. And we certainly don't have any research like that.
What is there research on?
I mean, the vast majority of the research are the clinical trials done by the companies, right? So pre-licensure trials. Then you certainly have some post-licensure studies done by different people, generally people that are very pro-vax, that are looking at a specific issue on a vaccine. So for example, with autism and vaccines, it's really surprising when you look at the research and you realize how very little there actually is. Because I was always taught, it's settled. It's been debunked. We have tons of research. You're crazy. Why would you even ask a question about autism? It definitely doesn't cause it. And then you look at the actual research, and the vast majority of it's on MMR or thimerosal, and really nothing on all vaccines. So you really can't say anything about all vaccines. You can say, in some of the basic research that we have thus far, it doesn't seem like the MMR increases your risk of getting autism in a setting of having your other vaccines. That's what most of the research is. So people do answer very specific questions like that. Generally, they'll look at some sort of database and they'll ask a question and they'll try to create a paper on it. But that's mostly it. We really don't have any vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. We don't have any prospective long-term trials. We don't have any of that. So it's really never been done.
How has like being a pediatrician, and are you a father?
Yeah, 2 kids.
How has that like shaped and changed your experience around this topic?
I just think in general, as a parent, it gives you more empathy for parents. You get a better understanding of the fears that a parent would have, the concerns around, well, I don't want my kid to get a horrible disease that I could have protected them against, but I also don't want to give my kid who's totally healthy a problem. And I've, heard from my friend or heard this or had a reaction to the COVID vaccine or whatever it is. They don't want to do that. And so it's really hard to, I think for a lot of parents that feel very torn between making the decision not, hence the title of the book, between a shot and a hard place. I feel like a lot of people feel like that. They're just not sure what to do, and they want to do the right thing, but they don't have a crystal ball, and nobody does. So you have to make a decision what you feel like is best. And it's really hard to do without all of the research that I really think that you need to make an informed decision, because we really need that long-term risk information to make a good decision. Like, I think we have a good understanding of the diseases. We know how frequent they are. We know how many people get them. We know what your risk is if you do get it. We know how well the vaccines work. We know that they generally work pretty well. But the question is, at what cost? And that's what I think a lot of parents are concerned about, especially now, because it's a different world. 50 years, 100 years ago, people were much more worried about dying of all these infections. And now people are less worried about that because from one part, you can argue the vaccines have decreased these things a lot, but at the same time, we are much healthier. We eat a lot better. We have more food. We're not nutrient deficient. We have hospitals and antibiotics and all of these things that make us healthier. And so parents are now much more worried about chronic diseases and what they see every day, which is asthma, autoimmune conditions, eczema. It's a different world. And I think people are worried that if they're going to give their kid a vaccine, that it's going to create problems. And while that's not been proven to be the case yet, it hasn't also really been studied. It's difficult to navigate that as a parent, because I think there's just so much information around vaccines. There's so much more noise around the concerns around vaccines. And it's tough for parents, I think, if they don't just want to do the CDC schedule, then it's hard to know what to trust.
Yeah, I know it's funny, like before you become a parent, you're like, never, or I always, or there's lots of those, like how you would do it. The joke, like the only perfect parent is the one who isn't one, or something like that, because yeah,
Yep.
once you're faced with the reality of making decisions for somebody else, it's a big deal. You talk to a lot of families. What are the most common like misconceptions about vaccines, that like myths you hear repeated over and over, where you're like, let me clear the air on this?
Well, I mean, I think the number one biggest myth is that vaccines have been studied extensively with autism. I just don't think that's true. That's a big one. I think another big myth would be around just the way vaccines were studied originally. The vast majority of pretty much all the vaccines on the childhood schedule were never really studied against an inert placebo. So I think that's important for people to understand. So basically meaning they weren't studied against saltwater or saline. Almost every study has been against other vaccines or just with the active component when you're looking at safety. So there certainly are some placebo-controlled trials, but the vast majority of them were never done for safety. They weren't done before it was on the market. So you have
And
this.
did you know these things before you started doing research, or were these things that you were also like shocked to learn?
A lot of it I learned through doing research for the book. So if you go back to when I was in training, I didn't know any of this. When you go to training in medicine, they teach you, okay, here are the diseases. Here's why they're so horrible. Here's how much better things are now because of vaccines. Here are the vaccines that we give. Here is the schedule. That's it. They don't really talk about anything else. You just kind of accept that without really thinking about it. You're like, okay, diseases are bad. Vaccines are good. Vaccines have stopped these diseases. We want to give people vaccines. That's what you know. As I went through the last decade or so, I've been asked so many more questions. I've had to look into things. I've had to think about things in a different way. So I have certainly learned along the way, but definitely a lot of what I learned was for the book, because you have to dive really deep. And until you actually do that, you just assume what you're taught is true because you have no real reason to think otherwise. And until you actually look at it, then you're like, oh, that's what the research is. Or you read some of the books that actually have gone through some of this stuff before, and you're like, that can't be true. And then you look at it and it is true. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of going through it that makes a big difference.
How deep are the pharmaceutical companies have a hand at like vaccine narrative?
I mean, I think they shape it completely, right? I think that they have so much money and they've had so much money for a long time, and they are able to fund everything. And so we don't even realize how much they're influencing us, but they are, and they fund the news and they fund the medical schools and they fund the journals and they fund the scientists. So they fund everything to some degree. And that obviously has an effect on the narrative because you're just trained in a pharmaceutical model. So I don't think we have any idea really how deeply it's entrenched, but it's very entrenched. That doesn't mean that doctors don't believe in vaccines. They do. But I just think that we don't know anything but the pharmaceutical model because that's what we've been taught from day one, and they've had their finger in the pie of everything. So we just don't think anything different than that. That's just normal. And anything that steps outside of that, they have a vested interest to shut it down, silence it, promote the things that they want to promote. I mean, they have unlimited money, so they can do whatever they want. And it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just their company and they're promoting their products. We just have let it get way out of hand, especially because the agencies that are supposed to be policing them are now funded in a large part by those companies. So, and people go back and forth. So there's just not a lot of good policing right now or pushing back on these companies. Like, why would a company do a study on their product that's already on the market to look for problems? Like there's no reason for a company like, well, let me just spend another couple $1 billion and let me see if I can find a problem for my product so that way we can pull it off the market. Like they're not going to do that. They're not going to research those things now. We have to do it. If you want to find a problem, someone else has to do it.
Why do you think there are not many studies on like long-term health on vaccinated, unvaccinated, and like what would be the best way to do those studies now?
So, okay, so there's a couple of things there. Number one, unfortunately, a lot of these studies weren't done in the best way possible originally. Nobody made them do it, or some of them were just done a long time ago before we even did studies this way. So they just weren't really a thought process in 1930 about doing a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. But then later on, companies know that if you study one vaccine versus another, and you're less likely to find a problem, because if any sort of problem is going to be probably similar across both groups. So it just minimizes your chance at risk. Once you have a vaccine on the market, then ethically speaking, there's the argument that's held that's like, well, we have this vaccine, it protects you, therefore we can't not give it to everybody. So therefore you can only study the old vaccine versus the new vaccine. And that's the pickle that we're in now,
Because it
because
wouldn't be ethical
would
to.
be ethical to not give kids vaccines. So anything that it wasn't studied the best way originally, but now you can't study it that way, and it makes it really tough. And the perfect example is the DTaP, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine, because we have a new one on the market, right? The DTaP, so the diphtheria, tetanus, acellular pertussis, which was studied against the old DTP, the wholesale vaccine, but the wholesale vaccine was taken off the market for safety concerns. So you have a vaccine studied against an old vaccine that you say is equally safe when you're studying it, but then the old one's taken off the market. So you don't have that baseline safety testing, which would be ideal. And that doesn't mean there's a problem. It just means it was never studied most optimally originally, but now you're in a pickle because you can't study it that way. So at least with what we're seeing lately, and what's been a lot of the discussion, there has been a push by Secretary Kennedy to say, look, if we're going to get a new vaccine on the market, especially one that's never been studied before, that there isn't one on the market, we want a placebo-controlled trial. We want something that's inert. And I don't see any problem with that. I mean, I think we should hold these companies to a high standard. We shouldn't accept a new product unless they studied in the best possible way. So we can see if there are problems. It doesn't mean there is, but you shouldn't be able to hide results or minimize your risk. Like, we want to know if it's safe or not. So we should study in the best possible way. So for the old vaccines, it's harder because you can't, and you're not going to be able to do it that way now, but you could do studies that are open, meaning you could do studies for people that choose to not vaccinate versus choose to vaccinate, and you can follow them forward. It's not the best possible study, but it's still very good. And you could at least still follow people forward that choose not to vaccinate. And that's the way you could study those groups and look for any differences between them. And of course, there are other things that we have to kind of parse out, because some people might live differently. They have different lifestyles, other things like that if you're not vaccinating, but still useful information.
Are you studying your clients?
No, it's like, I don't have enough patience to do any sort of stuff. It needs it'd have to be something that was big, and it would have to be, you really need something for anything to be very useful. It has to be bigger than one office. It has to be a lot of offices. It can't, otherwise you're just doing this, oh, you're just biased, you're an anti-vaxxer or whatever. You need like the CDC to do it, or a huge group of people to get, because you need billions of dollars to do the proper study. Realistically, it's something we have to do for like 10 years and follow people forward, and you need billions, trillions of dollars to do a study like that. So it needs to be a priority, and it needs to be something that enough people decide they want to do. And it's not done because, well, medicine says, well, they're safe, why do we need to do it? But I think there is enough concern now and enough differing opinions and voices that I hope that they will do something like that moving forward.
Can you speak about VAERS and if you've ever had to file a report?
So VAERS was vaccine adverse reporting. Basically, that's the system set up to report any injuries from a vaccine. Self-report, so anybody, basically, the parent, the company, the doctor, could put it in a report if they so choose, for any sort of, you can put any sort of injury, but generally it's for more major injuries. But again, it's self-report, so anybody can decide whether they think it could be from a vaccine, but doesn't mean that it is. And so that's the system that we basically have at the moment for reporting injuries. And yeah, I have reported before, not too many, but a few.
One of the rumors I've heard is that it's like less than 1% are actually reported. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the specific number, but mostly it's not reported because it's a lot of work to put those in. And first of all, the first problem is it's really hard to say that something's a vaccine injury, because it's really hard it's not like there's a test where you can be like, you had this reaction, therefore that's from the vaccine. So it's really easy to say, well, you had this reaction a couple of days later, maybe it's from the vaccine, maybe it was just going to happen. I don't really know. And so most people just don't put them in unless it's like a very, very serious reaction or very obviously from a vaccine. And most things you would never know if it's from a vaccine or not, because how would you know? If something happens 3 months after you get a vaccine, how do you know it was because of the vaccine? Like, you just don't know. So you only really get reports of things that happen just right after. And even then, most of the stuff wouldn't be reported.
So in your experience, in your research, in terms of these chronic diseases, like you were saying, autism, asthma, immune stuff, do vaccines play a role?
We don't know. Modern medicine says no. Right? That's the kind of standard opinion. For something like autism, it's never been studied, so we just have no idea. It's been studied for MMR, it's been studied for thimerosal, but not all the other vaccines. You get a lot of vaccines in the first year, so you can't say that it does, you can't say that it doesn't. It's just not been studied appropriately to make that decision. For other diseases, I mean, obviously every disease is different and there's different levels of research out there, but there's really, again, not much in the way of research on vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids moving forward. So you just have retrospective studies, and the mainstream opinion on almost all of them is it doesn't cause it. But then if you look at the other research out there, there are lots of great studies out there that show that maybe vaccines contribute to it in some way. So if there are studies on asthma and allergies, and eczema. And some studies show if you move things around in a different way, or you do things differently, or you don't do certain vaccines, then you decrease your risk of some of these things. Other studies don't show that. So it's a pretty mixed bag. And that's where I go back to, I think there's enough conflicting evidence that we're at a point it warrants doing the best studies to really look into what's correct and what's not correct. And that's really the only way to figure that out.
What do you know about MTHFR? Some parents talk about like if they are or their children are, they potentially have a harder time detoxing and might be more likely to have a reaction to vaccines.
Yeah, so MTHFR, it's one of the gene polymorphisms, the mutations you might have. When it was first talked about, it was like, oh, this is really important, and if you have this, then it's going to affect your detoxification, and that's a huge deal, and you shouldn't do this or that. But the reality is, a lot of people have a mutation. So if you want to know about it, that's fine. Your body's complicated. One mutation doesn't necessarily mean all that much in the long run. There are many different pathways and ways that we detoxify. If you have a severe mutation, could it affect you? Yeah, maybe, but it's not very definitive. Again, it's not really been studied enough to be able to say, oh, if you have this mutation, then it's going to really affect your risk with a vaccine. So people ask me about it, and if they want to do it, I think that's fine. It's not a very expensive test to do. You can go do it if you want to, but whether it gives you any sort of definitive answer of what you should do, not really, because most people have a mutation, or many people do, so that doesn't really tell you whether you should get a vaccine or not.
Okay. And we had talked about like questions parents should ask themselves in deciding like if they're doing the CDC schedule, delaying, declining altogether. When parents are talking to their pediatrician, what questions should they be asking their pediatrician to help them navigate that?
I mean, I think the first thing is you should feel comfortable asking questions to your pediatrician. It sounds simple, but it's not. I mean, a lot of doctors won't talk to you, and so I think you have to establish that up front, especially if you're someone who is more skeptical of vaccines or concerned about vaccines or not wanting to do the regular schedule or not wanting to do them at all. You need to make sure you're in an office that are going to be willing to do that with you. You have to be able to ask questions and have discussions. And so if you don't feel that that's true, then find another practice that it is true. I really think that's the key. I mean, other than that, it's just really being open to asking questions as they come up, and as you're worried, as you're reading through things, or as you wanted to know about X, Y, or Z, or whatever vaccines are coming up. Like, you just have to be able to have a conversation. And if you're with a doctor, you can have those conversations that can really help. If you're with someone that just says, follow the CDC schedule, then that's probably not going to be the right office for you. If that's up to you. If you want to do the CDC schedule, great, then go to one of those offices. But I think we need to start being okay with asking questions again, and pushing back a little bit on doctors and asking the tough questions. And I think if we do, then more doctors are going to be open to some of this stuff, because they're going to be forced to start to learn about it.
What do you advise for families who are just like, have no idea? They're just so torn. They're like, don't even know where to start. They don't want anything to happen to their child either way. Like, they're just really hesitant either way. How do you help them navigate that?
The best way to start, having conversations obviously helps. And one of the things that I think is really helpful from my office is setting up time just to talk about vaccines. So it might be just a telemedicine visit, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Like, both parents need to be there. And you just let them ask their questions, just kind of talk through like, okay, what are your concerns? What are you thinking? What are you thinking about doing? And then we go from there, because it just kind of depends. It depends where the family is. If they are like, well, I'm not thinking about doing any vaccines, what questions you have, versus like, I'm not really sure. And then we just kind of work our way back. For the family, I mean, no matter what you do, it's not enough to getting all the information in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Like, I think you have to go read things. You probably have to read a couple of different things, and that can give you a good lay of the land. So I think if you're like totally lost and you're just like, I don't know what to do, I'm like concerned about doing vaccines, just read a few books. You can read the CDC website, you can learn a little bit, you can read 1 or 2 or 3 books, whatever it is, and just get a lay of the landscape. And then you can ask more educated questions of your doctor. Because I always tell people, like, the first thing you have to figure out is, do you even want to do vaccines? Because sometimes it becomes just so complicated for people that they kind of overthink it. And for those families, I'm like, all right, look, you need to go home and you need to sit down, you need to read stuff, and then you need to think, do I want to do any or not? That's the first question. If you don't want to do any, then there's nothing else to talk about, right? Other than just the risks that you take from that. If you do want to do them, then you have to figure out, okay, and do I want to start? Do I want to start at the birth? Do I want to start at 2 months? Do I want to start at 2 years, 3 years? Like, what time frame? And then if you want to start, with what? Do I want to do one vaccine? Do I want to do multiple vaccines? If you want to do multiple, you can see what's recommended. If you want to do one, okay, which one? Just think about that. You don't need to think about all the vaccines or the whole schedule or every single thing you're going to do. You just need to decide what you're going to start and when. Then you go from there. And that way you can kind of break it down. And once you get started, you can figure out the rest of the schedule as you go. But you really need to decide if you're even going to do it in the first place. And then if you are going to do it, which one you're going to start with. And for the most part, that really helps families because then it breaks the question down to something much more manageable and simple, which is like a one-step thing, like figure out whether you want to do it or not. That's the first step. And that's obviously not easy for some people, but that's where if you're going to read stuff, you're going to start reading like, okay, I'm reading with the sense of, do I want to do this at all?
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I recommend for parents is to print out the schedule, the CDC schedule, and then just start with the first one. Just research that one vaccine and be like, do we want this, but not now? Do we want it on schedule? Do we never want it? And then for the next one, like only do research on the ones that are coming up next, because if you try to do it on all, unless you're in the boat where you're like, we're not doing anything, it's just like so overwhelming, all the information.
Yeah, and that's where for the book, for my book at least, I try to run through all the vaccines that you're going to be offered uh,
Hmm.
and kind of go through the first part of the book is really going through like, okay, what are the vaccines? What's in there? Why do we do it? Or
Hmm.
why it's offered? What are the risks from the diseases? What is the risk from the vaccines that we know? So like it kind of runs through and it's more simple, like just the basic stuff that's kind of synthesized for you. And then you get into the more of the big questions that people have and the discussions, which is new for I think a vaccine book in general, because a lot of them don't get into that stuff, but really like going through the pros and the cons of chronic disease and the pros and the cons of. So these are like the more complex issues. But for those people that want to get the lay of the land and understand why even people are hesitant. Like a lot of what I deal with is one parent that wants to do it and one parent that doesn't. And so I think having some bridge to understanding both sides is really helpful. And I think vaccines is a tennis match of sorts where it's like, oh, it's so obvious why you wouldn't do it. And then you read something else, you're like, oh, but maybe that is a good reason to do it. And
Yeah.
then you're like, all right, well, I never want to get the measles vaccine. And then somebody dies of measles. And you're like, oh, well, okay, well, maybe it's, I want to learn more about this. So it's not that cut and dry because these diseases are real. They exist. They could kill you for the most part. It's just not that commonly that it will. And so you have to kind of weigh those low risks, but things happen. I mean, if you get unlucky, it's possible. So you have to weigh that risk, and you have to weigh the risk that you're going to have a bad reaction to a vaccine, because even based on the published research, there are bad reactions, regardless of any of the other stuff. Like you definitely can get a seizure. You can definitely develop encephalitis. There are things that happen documented very well in the literature. They say 1 in a million. I don't think it's 1 in a million, but that's what they say. But even if it's 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, that's still a real risk. So these are things you have to consider.
Yeah. For families who are wanting vaccines, wanting to space things out, but like don't have like I want to wait till they're two, but they just want like they want on schedule more or less, but like space it out more, safer in air quotes amount of time in between them. But they don't have an idea of what that is. Do you have a recommendation of like how to space things out?
Yeah, again, you can't recommend anything but the regular schedule. So we can discuss it. I discuss it all the time. People do it in the book. I have multiple different schedules that people have done in the past, but you can't recommend something without evidence or research technically, right? It just doesn't make sense. It's a personal choice, and you have to decide how comfortable you are with doing vaccines. And a recommended schedule depends on what you want to do, because some people say I don't want to start till I'm two. Some people say that they want to do one at a time. They want to do one every month. They want to do one every 2 months. They want to do one every four. It's so different depending on each person. I would say most commonly when people want to do a slow schedule, they do one at a time every month or 2 months, and they just work their way through. So that's what people tend to do in the office. If they're doing a slow schedule, they just kind of do one of them, and then they come in at 2 months, they do the next one at 3 months, they do the next one at 4 months, and they just kind of work their way through, just get all the shots on the schedule, but just not as many on one visit. And then that's fine. I mean, the risk to go that kind of slow schedule is quite minimal. I mean, you're still doing all the shots, you're just spacing them out more, you have to come in more. So that is what I think a lot of people tend to do, that still want to get the vaccines, but just don't feel comfortable doing 3 or 4 in one day.
I think a lot of people, this is like a very polarized topic. Either they're like lean one way or the other. How do you find like a balanced approach to this for your book and for the sake of your families?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's not true. I think that most people are in the middle. I think what you hear online is very polarized. So I think the polarized people are the loudest, and that's what you
Mm-hmm.
hear so much of online, and everybody just wants to fight. But my experience has been that most people are actually somewhere in the middle, and the vast majority of parents are like, well, I don't want my kid to get these horrible diseases, but I also don't want them to have a bad reaction from a vaccine. I'm nervous about getting vaccines. I'm not really opposed to it, but I'm not sure about it. So I think that's where most people sit, and that's kind of where I sit as well. And so I think that's where going through my journey around vaccines is what the book is, and not trying to convince people of anything, but just discussing things I think is really helpful. And that's the feedback I've had so far. I mean, the book's been out for a little bit now and it's been doing great. I mean, I'm really excited it's doing great, and people have had really great feedback, and I haven't gotten in trouble yet, which we'll see. I won't get in trouble, but I mean, again, it's like, I think it takes people on a journey of discovery, and that's helpful to the parent who wants the information. But I can't tell you what I don't know. And I don't tell people in the book anything different than I tell people in the office. And I think that helps. But ultimately, if you dive into the research, you're going to have questions that don't have answers. So you're going to have to make decisions based on the information that we have. And I think that at least gives comfort that they understand the subject better. And hopefully you have a doctor that you can work with, that you can talk through as things go. Most kids do fine. Most of us got vaccines when we were kids. Most people do fine on vaccines. So I think there's a lot of fear around it, but most kids do just fine.
And you're in LA. Do you do virtual consults for
Yeah,
people who can't find that supportive pediatrician?
Yeah, so I started doing that because I got so many requests to do it. I can't give medical advice, but I do coaching, vaccine coaching sessions, which in the book I have that info on there, or on the website for the book. So yeah, I've done a bunch of those just to go through people's questions and talk in general about vaccines, and kind of talk about what we discussed, but maybe a little bit more specific to the questions that parents have, or people have read the book, or other things like that, and just have follow-up questions. Then I think that can be really helpful. So yeah, I've started doing that because I get a lot of questions from people.
Yeah, I was gonna say I could imagine it would be nice to feel like you had somebody in your court who respected whatever your decision was, because I know that's the hardest part, is parents feel like they can't be honest about what their plans are and ask honest questions.
Yeah, and sometimes it just helps for a parent to just talk about things, or both parents, to just kind of talk it through, feel like they're not crazy, feel like they're not the only woo-woo one out there, realize that a lot of people have these same questions, and just trying to help them navigate through the concerns that they have. And I think having a conversation helps people de-stress a little bit, and they can feel like they're actually heard and their concerns are heard, and we can talk about what I know. It does help some people for sure.
Is there anything that you discovered when writing the book that we haven't touched base on, or like the bottom line that you
Oh,
want
so many things.
parents to take away?
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line takeaway is really that you're not crazy for asking questions. I think good parents ask questions, and it's okay to be concerned about something you're injecting into your kid at 20, 30, 50 times. I think it's okay to push back. I think it's okay to talk to your doctor about these things. And I think we have to do that in order to move forward. Vaccine as a word can't be taboo. You have to be able to post about it on social media. We have to be able to have debates. We have to have discussions like this. And I go back to, again, the point of the book, Between a Shot and a Hard Place, is literally to have these kind of conversations. That's why I did it. I was like, I have to do it. I want to talk about it. Everybody always wants to talk about it. I never do. And it's not really fair, because I think people have these questions and we have to discuss it. And it's been really nice to see that the environment has changed a little, to the point where this isn't getting censored anymore, and people are able to post about it, and people are having discussions with me on this, and lots of great podcasts and shows have had me on, which is great. And I think that's the change that we're going to need for this discussion to change, because we need doctors to change. We need doctors to be aware of the stuff that I've learned, and have to be aware of these questions that parents have. And if we can partner back up, I mean, ultimately the goal is not to get kids to get more vaccines, it's to have healthier kids. And that might mean more vaccines, or it might mean zero vaccines. I don't know what that's going to mean 20 years from now, but all of our goal is the same. It's to have healthy kids. And if we're not open to the risks around vaccines, we're never going to make them better. We're never going to make them safer. We're never going to have healthier kids, because we're only going to be pushing more and more of a medical product. And that's not what we're trying to do. We shouldn't be trying to do that in medicine. We're not trying to get people to get more vaccines. We're trying to get healthier kids. Doctors currently believe the more vaccines you get, the healthier you are. And so the question is that true? Or if it does prevent you from these diseases, which I think it does, at what cost? At what cost to these vaccines are we taking these? And then I think if we think in that way, then we will be more open to getting more research and more data, and we can make these vaccines safer and better, and decide which ones are the most important ones, which ones we should be doing. Because otherwise, ultimately, we're going to have like 1,000 vaccines to give our kids, and that may be not good. Just because we can do a vaccine doesn't mean we should, and more isn't always better.
Yeah. Have you gotten any feedback from like doctors, pediatricians who have read your book? Because I can imagine how you're saying there wasn't a lot of information in school and you kind of had to find it on your own, that this would be a good resource for them, or maybe even potentially this book could be a resource for parents to bring to the pediatrician to be like in terms of talking points.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, so far so good, you know. I mean, most people that have read it, I know, or are people that I know, or people that follow me. So obviously,
Hmm.
kind of a biased group. A few people that would certainly be outside of that group have read it. Nobody, doesn't talk to me anymore. Oh, that's good. I haven't received any like major negative feedback from doctors, but I don't know how many of the people that are mainstream would have ever read the book or even know about it.
Right.
So we'll see. I mean, I think it'll be interesting as it grows and as it gets out there a little bit more to see if people read it and they kind of come after me for different things. But I mean, I'm open to that. I don't care. Like if you disagree with something in there, I like say it many times in the book. Like just tell me. The point of the book is not to get people to vaccinate or not vaccinate. It's to provide information. So if something is wrong, I want to know. I'll change it. I don't care. I'm happy to debate or discuss anything with anybody about vaccines because I just want to learn and get the best information. So I hope and I think that kind of mentality will be seen even from someone who's very, very staunchly pro-vaccine. And if they actually read the book, then maybe it'll open their eyes a little bit to some things, or maybe they'll be open to talking to me. I don't know, but it's hard to know right now. I mean, so far it's been wonderful, but that is still within kind of my world.
Yeah,
So
because it just came out pretty recently. Yeah.
yeah, it just came out recently, and the vast majority of things that will have me on are the people who have the podcast who listen to those kind of podcasts. They tend to be more open-minded. It's not like I'm going on the Today Show or something. We'll see if it crosses over to that point where I get to be on some of those things, how that's going to go. But I have definitely had some like mainstream doctors reach out that are like excited about it. I've had some young doctors who are like in med school or other places. They're like, "Oh, I read your book. I'm so happy. I had these kind of questions. I didn't really know where to ask or where to look at this information, but I'm glad you were like talking about it because I was thinking about these things too." So it's so far so good. I don't know. It's better than I ever had imagined or dreamed. So I don't know where things are going to go, but thus far, it's sold several thousand copies. It's done really well. People have given really good reviews and really not much like pushback or hate, which I assumed would be coming my way. So all in all, a great, first month.
Well, if people want to connect with you, can you leave contact info and we'll put it in the show notes as well?
Yeah, so the easiest way you can go to Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator, or you can go to you can get the book anywhere that books are sold, Amazon, all those places, or theshotbook.com, and you can reach me through there.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe. If you'd like to follow along, you can find us on Instagram at Born Wild Podcast and Facebook. You can go to our website at www.bornwildmidwifery.com. See you later.